Welcome to the Future Worlds online event today. For those of you who don't know, Future Worlds is the on-campus startup accelerator at the University of Southampton. We exist to help startup founders to change the world with their ideas. And I'm really excited today to be joined by three really successful startup founders who are going to be sharing their journeys with you. We're looking at that central dilemma. If you're going to launch, should you launch with a team or should you launch on your own? It's often said within startup circles that it's just impossible to launch a startup on your own, that it's so difficult, it's so hard. Lots of investors prefer teams. Lots of startup accelerators will only accept teams. And so surely you can only do it if you do it as part of a team. It's too hard to do it on your own. But Crunchbase data showed that actually half of successful startup exits come from startups launched by a lone founder. So it's definitely possible to do it. In fact, it's the most common form of successful team is on your own. So what would be the way to do it? How would you do it successfully? We're going to be looking at that today, looking at lessons around trust, around communication, around how you overcome the inevitable frictions that can arise. The three founders that we've got are great and have a real breadth of experience, sharing how they came to form as part of a team, from starting on the problem and coming together around a passion for sustainability, from launching something, getting started and then needing someone to help build a half-built product, from going down the pub 5 times in a row in a week with your best mate and really convincing yourself, let's just do it. All of these different routes to coming together as a co-founder team. But there's no real formula to it. There's no one way that's right, but there's a whole range of different experiences that you can learn from. So I'm sure you're going to find today's panel really helpful and really insightful. Loads of practical advice to help you think through your own journey. So this is a pre-recorded panel, and so in fact the panelists are going to be here on the live chat, so make sure you're using the live chat throughout the event. You're going to be interacting directly with the kind of questions that arise. The Future Worlds team's on it as well. Other than that, for me to say, really enjoy everything from today. Thank you. So welcome everyone to the next Future Worlds online event. This is about founders' dilemmas, about launching solo or bringing on a co-founding team and what that looks like. So we're really excited today to have three fantastic founders who have each launched their own journeys, and they can share some of the experiences along the way that they've picked up of their experiences of launching startups, what it's looked like for them, how they've interacted with their co-founders. So we've got three founders today. We've got Jade. Jade is an alumna of Southampton. She graduated a few years ago, went into the construction industry, and then channeled her passion for sustainability into launching the company Qualis with her co-founder Brittany. They went through Entrepreneur First, EF, and then last year raised an €800,000 seed round to really make a difference with their data management platform to help construction companies to manage and control risks in construction. So that's Jade. We've got Saheli, who also an alumnus of Southampton, graduated a few years before Jade, and then went to Vancouver, got involved in startups in Vancouver, tried a number of different projects himself before launching Foro Technologies, which he grew, and then within about 3 years sold Foro Technologies to a listed Canadian company, and has gone from there into being an investor, investing in a number of different businesses, mostly in the US and Canada, but with a global focus. And then lastly, we've got Ian Painter, the only one who's not an alumnus of Southampton, but a long-term resident in Southampton, having moved in, and has launched Snowflake software many years ago that he's then grown organically, bootstrapped it through to a big exit this year to Cirium. So Snowflake software is an aviation data management platform that is making a huge difference within aviation by the exchange of data between different partners in the aviation sector. So that's three great founders that can share a whole range of different stories. So I'm going to be really keen to get into detail with each of them. But I've given a quick overview, but maybe each of you, I'm going to ask you in person just to give a little potted history of your story today. So Jade, I'll go to you first.
Sure, no, thanks for that, Ben. So yeah, as you mentioned, so my background was in environmental management and construction. My co-founder actually worked on the design side of the construction sector. And it was part of the problem that we were both facing on different ends of the spectrum that meant that actually when we came together, we realized that there was a common thread there where we could tie in some of the headaches I was experiencing, which were around data collection and management, managing on-site compliance, alongside the data that she was after on the design side, where they were trying to forecast the impacts of new buildings or critical infrastructure, basing it on what was pretty sort of shady data or lacking in terms of validation from on-site use. So that's how we kind of came together and figured out that Qflow and the technology that we're building there was the way to solve that problem. So we're both different to some other co-founding pairs or teams. We're actually quite similar in terms of our background. We're both domain experts on different ends of the spectrum. So we had a kind of problem-first approach to building the business and the technology around it. And now we have a fantastic team of data scientists and software engineers who are working with us towards this kind of common mission, really.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jade. So Ali, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Thanks, Ben. So yeah, I graduated 2010 from Southampton to computer engineering, moved to Vancouver. I did a bunch of ideas, but at the time I was snowboarding a lot and I wanted to sell my snowboard, buy snowboard, and there was no really good site to do it. So I built a classified website called Foro, listed my stuff, and then posted to my friends. They started buying it, and then they started listing their items, and then the site started growing. I met my co-founder, and then we built a company, and then after 3-4 years, we sold the company. And in the past 5 years, I'm on the dark side of the venture, which is investments and making investment in really early stage companies.
Fantastic. And Ian, tell us about your journey. It's been a bit longer for you.
Yeah, so we started in 2001. So 3 tech co-founders. Actually, 3 of us all work for Ordnance Survey in Southampton. So keeping it sort of local in that scenario. We started off in local and central government, and then sort of after 13 years, the business wasn't really going anywhere. So we did a major pivot after 13 years in, and then sort of pivoted the business with the same sort of tech, but into the sort of aviation industry. And then it's strange to have a business for that long and it not really do anything, and then go into like a really, really big scaling cycle where you're sort of, you're on a really fast sort of growth curve. And then after the sort of end of that pivot, we've just recently, 3 months ago, sold to Cirium, who are part of RELX, the large FTSE 100 company. So we've gone from sort of being in a business of sort of 45 staff to a business of sort of 42,000. So that's where we are right now. And so it's a different start of the journey.
Oh, fantastic. So each of you in different ways have launched with co-founders. So tell us a little bit about what's been the best bit of launching with a co-founder. Ali?
I think the best part is when you're down, they push you. So you have someone that you can bounce off ideas and can energize you. I think starting a company is very lonely. It doesn't matter what scale you are. If you're 500 or 42,000, I think the management always feels lonely because no one really understands that challenge is going through. So if you have a co-founder that really understands you and understands the challenge that you faced, it could be with investors, with customers, lawsuits, or anything, they're really trying to help you pass that and trying to say, hey, there's light at the end of this tunnel, just let's come out stronger. So I think that's the best part of having a co-founder.
And Jade, what's been your experience, the best bits?
I mean, I completely agree with what Alex mentioned there. I think the opposite end of the spectrum is you have all these shared experiences, which you just don't get with anybody else, no matter how close you are with anybody in the team or outside of the team that you're building. So for us, it was, well, for me personally, at least anyway, it was probably the validation of the first sale that we made, not through essence of the sale itself, but I think the fact that both me and my co-founder had, as many startup teams do, had kind of hacked our way through to this kind of initial product and are still building the product now, and we'll continue to do so for probably a very long time. But the kind of elation and the validation that you get from knowing that you're solving a real problem, and a problem that in our case, both of us had experienced in very different ways, was just immense. And I think that kind of ability to have that shared experience and take that and know how to bounce off ideas from each other. Typically, co-founding teams will be quite different in whether it's skills or personality or otherwise. You'll have complementary areas, and to be able to bounce those things around rather than, again, in solitude, whether it's a problem that you're trying to solve or a challenge you're experiencing or something new you're trying to look at, is that, yeah, there's no other way to describe it. I think it's, for me anyway, it's just been one of the most enjoyable experiences in being able to have that level of kind of solid understanding between the two of you and what you're working towards.
Yeah. I mean, Paul Graham from YC comments that the highs are higher in co-founder teams than they are as a solo founder, and the lows are less bad when you're with co-founders, but they're much more extreme when you're on your own. And so it seems that resonates really strongly with your experience. Ian, what about you? Looking back to 2001, Space Odyssey.
You make me feel old, man.
What were some of the best bits of going on that journey with co-founders?
I mean, it's no different to Jade. I mean, Jade really just completely mirrored what, pretty much what I was going to say. I mean, it's like, when you start up a business, particularly if you don't come from a sort of incubator or anywhere where you've got a sense of what's in front of you. So like, I went from civil service, or we went from civil service into starting a business with no business background, no experience of like ECS or Future Worlds or any of those sort of startup communities. So you go through a lot of firsts together. So like I think like even in this time, 18 years of an exit, my strongest memory is actually the first time I received a purchase order. That point is such a huge point of validation of like, you're not just playing around with tech. Somebody realizes value. You validated your idea. I mean, we were selling enterprise software, so it was a relatively large sum of money in our first deal. So in that scenario, that validation was just, incredible. And we went through it, particularly in the first sort of 3 or 4 years, the very number of firsts, like, the first time you go to a conference, you pitch in front of customers, you run a user conference where you've got like 20 or 30 customers. I mean, all those things were like incredible to share that experience. I think another really strong memory was first office. Like the first time we actually had our own office, not a shared space, not working out of bedrooms. I remember really clearly today, like we had no furniture, but we owned the office, and we just sat on the floor drinking cheap champagne out of a plastic cup. That's like a super strong memory of mine, like, and that's the start of the journey really. And it's amazing to share that with people.
And I mean, Jade, you touched on it a little bit already, but what was it that kind of formed the idea of the co-founders that you chose? What did you look for in choosing the co-founder that you went with?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think everyone here has got obviously different experiences of how they met co-founders or came across another person. I mean, for me, neither one of us were looking for a co-founder or to build a business. It was quite a bizarre coincidence in a way, where we met on a program, both working towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. We're in a kind of collective group that are working towards this kind of non-profit project or organization that we were setting up at the time. And we kind of bonded in particular because of shared experiences with the industry, coming from different ends of the spectrum, and we both wanted to solve these challenges in our sector, which we had a love-hate relationship with and still do to this very day. And ultimately, it was kind of that shared purpose that brought us together. And we thought, okay, well, actually, if we want to tackle this problem, which both of us experience in different ways, then the way to solve it is by building this. And it just so happens that encapsulated a technology and a business and everything else. And then we kind of got started on that journey afterwards. So it was very much coming from the angle of we knew each other. We'd gone through some quite sort of extreme experiences together already and had a level of trust, which was quite unique in of itself, I think. And we had this problem that we both wanted to tackle, and that was what drove it. And then the rest kind of followed after that point. So it was very much a problem first approach.
Yeah, so it seems like you came together around that problem, that purpose and that idea, and that's what then formed the team. Whereas Ali, I know it was quite different for your experience with Foro.
Yeah, mine was a little different. So as I said, I built a prototype website. We launched it. I launched it, and then we started getting customers. People were coming to the site, listing and buying the items. At the time, I realized that a lot of people are accessing their website through the iPhone. It was 2011, and I was like, well, I can't learn iOS that fast, so I need someone to help me to build an iPhone app. So I went online and looked at Stack Overflow, and I want someone in Vancouver at the time that built a lot of products, like iOS, and I wanted to partner with the person. I found my co-founder. He was actually a student at UBC. He was a second-year student. I emailed him and said, hey, I've been playing with your app. It's beautiful. It's really cool. I have this idea. I have customers. Do you want to meet up? We met. We went for coffee a few times. I managed to convince him. He joined me. as a co-founder, and he built an iOS app. 6 months after, he dropped out of university, second year. There was a lot of convincing from his side to his parents that why Foro is a better option than going through university. So he dropped out and he partnered with me, and we basically started a journey. He focused on the mobile app, and I focused on the backend. And that's how we kind of built Foro, and then stories from there.
And Ian, I guess yours was pretty different again.
Yeah, I think, in that scenario, yeah, I mean, when I look back, there wasn't much thought to it. So, I think, you hear a lot of people who spend a lot of time thinking about starting up a business and making a change. And, I just delivered a really big program for my previous employer. And in that scenario, the next thing I was due to work on, wasn't particularly exciting. And it just so happened that what turned out to be my co-founder, who was my best man and best friend who was working there, he was at a similar scenario where we were both going on to projects that weren't like that interesting. So we lived on the same street. I have a pub next door to my house. We basically met there for 5 days in a row for last orders for the last sort of hour of a pub, and then just decided to set up a business. We didn't really study the market or do any of those things. And it was a decision made over like 5 days, no backing. It was all like bootstrapped. And we sort of, fell into it really, more than anything else, and knew that, some of the knew the market relatively well that we were getting into, because it was linked to our previous employer. But, there wasn't too much thought behind it. And, I didn't go and choose, a co-founder because we didn't really have an idea. So it was just like, we like each other, we work really well. There's got to be something here that we can do. So we just, had a few beers and then decided, right, we're going to resign. And we both had the same boss. So like, I resigned in the morning, and my boss then went to my co-founder about an hour later, and he's like, oh my God, Ian's resigned. And he said, yeah, well, we need to have a discussion. And then he resigned as well. So it was, I don't think my boss really thanked me for that.
So it's real kind of Wild West, yeehaw, just kind of.
It was. But interestingly, like I talked to a lot of co-founders, and when you really look at the risk, like really early on, it's not that much risk. Yeah, I mean, we went from really good salaries, depending on how young you do it, and depending on how many dependents, I guess it's depending on the risk. But like, we both had really decent salaries. We had some savings, but the maximum exposure would be if it went completely wrong, we would have lost like 6 months of salary. So maybe we'd lost like 10 grand each. I mean, you can recover from, 10 grand each. So when you really look at it, it's not a huge risk. I mean, it's time, it's effort, and it's ego if it goes south, but it's not really a huge risk at the start. The risks really start happening as you sort of start to scale and have to raise money and, put things on the line. That's when the risks really are. The actual startup moment, is an incredible learning curve, but it's actually not that much financial risk.
And it's easy. I think a lot of people look at these great successes, like you guys that have launched these businesses, scaled them, had this big exit. It's really exciting. They look at the successes, but in those early days, what were some of the challenges that you came across, particularly looking at the challenges within your co-founder teams? Like Ali, what were some of the challenges you had to overcome?
I want to actually add something that Ian said. For a while, I had the mindset of everyone could become an entrepreneur. I had this mindset that like, if you're really good, and I think founders needs to be extremely good, otherwise you become a terrible founder. You got to be really smart to start business. I always thought, like, why not everyone just quit and start a business? And the worst thing, you can just go back and work at Facebook, Google, all this stuff, get an amazing salary, right? And I thought everyone could do that. But I think my mindset changed in the past 5-6 years. I realized that to become a good founder, you need to understand pressure. You need to understand a lot of things that are not, sexy. And I think that's not for everyone. And I've seen it happen and happen again, that founders start a business and they become extremely depressed and they really hate their job and they become a great engineer working in a bigger company. So you're right about financial reward, but I think founding company is not for everyone. I think I had a different opinion 6 years ago, but now that's just, I think I changed my mind. I realized that there are some people who really great start a company, but they're actually great engineers or great product managers. They're not really good founder. That's just my experience. I think I learned. The challenge that I had, I think that was a question that I think it's the same thing happened. I think we started a company, both pretty good engineers, I would say. We built a great product. Everything was perfect. But as soon as we hit the scale, a lot of problems arose, not just technical, operation-wise, dealing with investors, answering investors, customers complaining, why this happened, answering customers 3 a.m., 5 a.m. over the weekend, no holidays, right? You can't go just say, turn up the phone. But we didn't. You had to always answer that. That responsibility, I think, was at the time was high, I think, for my co-founder. And again, I think his character he was a great engineer, a great person to develop product, but not really, again, at that time, managing that stress. I think that was the challenge that we really faced.
Yeah, and that need to handle stress and pressure is such a key challenge for you as co-founder. Sorry, Ian, you were going to say.
Yeah, no, I think like it's interesting. It's in Peter Thiel's book, he talks about like that test of like the 10. I think he calls it the 10th hire test, which is the scenario of like, what would you can you deal with like having a team of 10 people reporting to you? Is that something that excites you, or is that something that is like the real dread? Because I think in that scenario, you often see tech people who just do not want to go into the areas that you need to do. And I think there's a really interesting thing that tech gets you your seed money and management gets you your exit. And you have to sort of think that as a founder, your career and your passion may change. You're definitely not going to be able to just stay in the tech for your whole journey of your business. And in some people do get to do that, in co-founders, some people get to be the CTO. In my scenario, I had to give up my technical career and become CEO and deal with all those like issues, because my other co-founders really did not want to do that at all. And so you can get pushed into areas that maybe you don't necessarily want to go in. But yeah, I think it's that scenario of really thinking about not what it's like at the start, but what it's like to get your exit. What will that look like? And then what will your role look like in that exit? And are you willing to make the sacrifices to get there?
I get the impression, Ian, that you were kind of somewhat pushed into them being the chief exec. You started as a techie, but then the other techies around you were like, no, you're going to have to do that. You're going to take on the lead role. How did that feel at the time when you were having to take on that responsibility and you perhaps hadn't chosen it?
I mean, it was interesting. We had there were 3 of us at the time, and we had a vote to do that because we started getting customers, relatively quickly, and then all those things that happen with customers that Ali talked about, and we literally had a vote, and the other 2 sort of were so slouched in their chairs they were pretty much under the table when it was like, well, who's going to be the CEO then? And it was just like there was just me at the table by the end of it because they were pretty much hiding behind the table. So I mean, you get into a scenario where either somebody has to do this, or you pretty much realize that you're going to have to shut down because you can't ignore customers, and you can't ignore understanding the market, and you can't ignore having to lead staff that maybe don't have that passion for founding, but you need to make them passionate about your business. So you have to be able to lead and to nurture people and grow them. And so yeah, I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew that if I didn't step up to do that, then the others wouldn't, and the business would have to stop. And there's no way I wanted to stop that journey at the time. So yeah, there's definitely some scenarios where it's tough. So yeah, and I don't regret it, to be honest. It's changed me. I mean, you guys wouldn't even be able to, I wouldn't even be able to hold a conversation with you guys. I've changed completely, personality, everything has changed. Amazing things that I've done along the way, and so I don't regret it. But at the time, it was just a decision that was sort of almost forced on me. So yeah, I mean, you evolve as a person, and that's part of being a founder.
Yeah. What about you, Jade? What have been some of the challenges that you've had to work through in that co-founding team?
I think similar to what both Ian and Ali have mentioned before and alluded to, I think the challenge is rarely with the tech or the product in a business. It's usually with people, whether that's your customers or how you manage your team and the skills you have to learn as part of that process. So for us, I mentioned before, we were quite similar in background, but we had very complementary, still do have very complementary personality traits and ways of working together. And I think for us, the definition between who is going to be CEO, who is going to be something else. Like for me, I wasn't, Brittany was a very clear CEO right from the very start. We both knew that. And for me, I wasn't a typical CTO. I had no technical background. I wasn't a COO. I wasn't really anything. But I did know the problem space incredibly well. And I came from what is currently our end usership background. So the role differentiation and the kind of the shared responsibilities, I think, as we talked about, you do have to define quite early on, and sometimes that's natural and sometimes it's not, as we've kind of seen through the conversation so far. But I'd say it is very true when you start to grow as a team. Like we worked in a certain way with a certain number of people, and we've grown with more people now, and the team has expanded since. And the way that we run the business and the way that we interact with each other has changed, because although we have these responsibility sets, knowing who takes ownership of what, but we're still working together in running this business, is you need to define what that looks like and how you work together. And each week almost it seems to change. And as long as you're able to work and trust with your partner, effectively your co-founder, in our case at least anyway, as long as you're able to trust each other, to be able to manage those areas and work with each other through those challenges, whether it's people, technology based or otherwise, then that's all you can really ask for in a kind of co-founding team.
Yeah, so you touched a little bit around kind of working out roles. You know, it's been said that most co-founders talk about experiencing more stress with their co-founders than they do with their life partners. That, you know, it can be really stressful because you're in this pressure cooker. Like, how do you manage the frictions that can come up between you as teams? Because inevitably there's going to be frictions. How have you been handling that, Jade?
You need to not take anything personally. And actually, me and my co-founder are quite good at this. We're remarkably objective people in the way that we work together. And I think we've had this right from the very start. Again, it kind of came about organically just because of our personalities. But I think if it doesn't, then setting those kind of clear lines to how you're going to work together and conflict resolution, for example, is a really sensible thing to do. So for us, we have, like I mentioned, these sort of different areas of responsibility and shared responsibility. And whenever we're talking about something, it's not, and the same goes with our team. We try to reinforce this as much as possible, in that if we're talking about a proposal or a way of doing something or an option for making a decision, we propose it to each other and to anybody else as, right, this is an option, right? Tell me your options, and then we'll work out what is best for the business and the purpose and our end goal. And it always ties back to our end goal and mission as a company. If it complies with that, and the risks can be mitigated or whatever decision it is that we're taking, then we'll work together and we'll find a way that both of us can, if it's just two of us required for, and work out a way to kind of come to a conclusion in that sense. And we've rarely been in a position where we fundamentally disagree with each other on something, because if you're looking at two options per se, then you will be able to work through which one is a better decision for the company. And if you've got that shared purpose, that's what it comes down to. If you have the shared purpose and you are both tightly aligned to that common goal, then that will always work, because you've always got that. That's what the thing you've got in mind. It's not personal. It's not my opinion versus your opinion. It's, we've got this thing. What's the best option to get there? And if you've got that in mind, then the rest should start in place. But having kind of techniques and ways to resolve conflict can really help. And for us, it's about presenting options as options and not as opinions, which helps us.
Yeah. And Ali, you know, when the pressure really kicked on for you guys at Foro, when you had customers, investment, how did you work through some of those frictions?
Well, I want to take you back to the beginning. So we didn't raise any money for the first 2 years. So everything was equity. And, you know, I actually read Founder's Dilemma at that time. And everything in theory was easy, but in practice was extremely hard. So I actually had this dilemma at the time that, okay, I didn't have any money. My co-founder didn't have money, and he had the skills to build a product, which I didn't, right? So when we came to disagreement, we either had to say goodbye and the business had to shut down, or we just ignore it and we just continue building it. And he built the iOS and I built the app, even though we knew we had disagreements. But the thing is, we couldn't actually, because there was no money, right? So everything was equity. Either had to go hire someone, pay, I don't know, $60,000, $70,000, which I didn't have, or kind of continue just ignore it and say, you know what, let's go forward and hopefully this get dissolved. If you tell me all this advice, I still couldn't do anything at the time, because what could I do? Just go look for someone. I had no money to pay or anything. So I think is, when I see founding team, I actually tell them nowadays that, you know what, communication is the most important thing. But the thing, again, that's a theory, because what, like, you scale and you sit down and say, what would you like to do in 5 years, 10 years? Like, you don't know. You don't even know what's happening next week. I think as long as you find your role in the company, that, well, I think it seems like, as Ian mentioned, maybe you just don't like dealing with customers. So maybe just really focus on tech and leave me to do that. Because it's tough to having those conversations early on. It's super important to have it, but to be honest, I think most founders, I did it, just ignore it, because I just wanted to just build the business and bring customers and move on. I just didn't want to actually divorce at that time, because if I divorced, then the business would implode. So it was a really hard time to either have a conversation or not have a conversation. But I would just say communication is the key.
But it sounds like some of your advice is, well, you haven't got many options. You just got to push through. Like, should you just try and push these things back and just kind of push through and sort it out later? Like, what's been your experience, Ian? Should you just head down, build the product?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Like I like in Jade's scenario, go back to what Jade was saying, just a little bit of a follow up there. I think one thing that helped us massively was to have a non-exec. So we had a non-exec, or turned into our chairman, that joined us after about 9 months. So he was somebody in the industry, had set up 3 or 4 different companies, found them, sold them as part of the sort of Cambridge entrepreneur set. And like, I think you will have disagreements no matter how good it is, and no matter how much frameworks you put in place, and having somebody out of the business, whether that's a non-exec or an investor that knows you not just as business people, but a little bit as gets to know you as individuals, then they can help, really help a lot to sort of, make the right decisions and do that. One thing that we found, and interesting, we only really discovered this on the second part, which is like, when we pivoted, was instead of having like an organizational chart, have an accountability chart that clearly defines that only one person has a particular accountability for something. Because I think what I found in our journey, and one of our co-founders actually sort of had to leave the business, is like, you can never remove that gravitas that a co-founder has. So they might not be very active in your business, or they may not be in your business at all, but the way your employees see them is very, very different. So they're always tempted, because they've got a vested interest in the exit, to sort of step in and sort of give an opinion, but and sort of put the business into a scenario where it's very difficult to move forward. So having like an accountability chart that just drives accountability and say, this person is accountable for this. You can have disagreements, but really when it boils down to it, I'm accountable for this, you're accountable for that. And if you have those nice boundaries, and again, Jade seems to have done a really great job in terms of, she's got some really good ways of resolving conflict. But to not get to the conflict, you can use these really powerful tools called, we use one of them called an accountability chart, which is part of the entrepreneurial operating system, which Ben actually brought to our business. So I would definitely recommend that book called Traction. And that had the accountability chart. And I'd say that's been the most transformational part of our business, even sort of, 18 years in. Clear accountabilities work really well.
And so as you look back on your journeys, you've had some highs, you've had some lows. What would be some of the things that you would do differently? What would be something you'd look back and you say, okay, I did that, but I wish I'd changed it? Ali?
Yeah, I think what would I change would be when I mentioned when we had our first change with that co-founder, I would just say what the end goal is, right? So like, what do you want to achieve out of this journey together, right? I guess someone wants to sell it really early. Someone wants to sell it in 5 years. Someone wants it to build a really good tech. And I think initially you don't know that, but as you build a product, you get traction, you get customers, investors. you have these sort of ideas in your mind and maybe you're not sharing with the co-founder. I think having a really open communication, then you could kind of figure out, okay, where's the other person is. I wish I had that. I wish I had these conversations really early on, right? Again, not just when you start because you don't know what's happening, but as you see the traction, and see the money coming in, as you see investors knocking the door, then you should really sit down and say, okay, where you want to take this? Is this a short term, a long term, a brand? What do you want to get out of this? I think those conversations really, but I just didn't have it, I think, at the right time.
Yeah. And Jade, anything that you would do differently from how you started?
Yeah, lots of things. To focus, I suppose, on it's kind of the theme of co-founding team, though. I think one of the things that we're still learning constantly is I personally would trust my gut a little bit more with certain things. There are certain decisions that we could have taken probably earlier than we did, and a lot of it was just learning as you go. In terms of where we took the product, in terms of timing for investment, and sort of various other things. And I think sometimes you have a bit of an internal flag system that is quite easy to logic your way out of, but you don't necessarily know how to articulate. So I'd say the one thing that probably both of us would, well, I know certainly from my perspective, and we both learned in different ways, but would be to trust your gut a little bit more with decisions, whether it's on an individual basis or as a co-founding team.
Mm-hmm. And Ian, lastly to you.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say it's only my experience of three tech founders. I think you have to have a bit more diversity of the people that you found with. I mean, interesting when you read the Founders Dilemmas book, I think I broke every one of his key things. I got there in the end, but it took like 18 years. So, but I think like there's definitely that scenario of three tech founders is not a good place. You tend to sort of think that the next release is going to solve all your problems, when actually your problems are business and commercial and sales and all these things. And Ben, I think, as we were warming up for this call, I like that hacker, hustler, hipster. That's really, really good advice to have some diversity. And also I like, Jade's approach of coming at it from a problem and then, building the tech. And if you actually, Jade and Ali, they're both the same, that they had a business and it wasn't a tech-driven business. They had a business with customers and then they used tech to actually, deliver and scale on that. So whereas we, I think, just, we built some software and of course it was just going to sell itself. And that's just not the case. So I think definitely on the tech side. And I'd also even question, three founders. I mean, human nature is like in our scenario where we had three founders, human nature is that you don't equally have like equal relationships across, three people. And I think having two founders is probably a better situation than three, because you naturally will gravitate towards, one person or you'll have more issues in that scenario. So I think having two is a good thing. So yeah, those things. And I'd say probably one of the biggest influences in my life has been my non-exec chairman that stayed with us, was going to be with us for 2 years and ended up staying right to the exit for 18 years. So, shout out to Peter Woodsford if he ever reads this, because he just massively influenced me across that whole time. So somebody independent out of the daily grind, which is really hard, just to keep you on that sort of straight and narrow, is invaluable.
That's really helpful. So look, we're tight on time. We're gonna bring it to a close, but I'd really like to go around each of you, just one short. What would be the most important bit of advice that you would give to someone who's at the start of their journey and they're weighing up their options now, looking at going it alone, going with others, looking at who should they work with or what should they do? What would be one key bit of advice that you would give to someone who's starting their journey? Jade, I'll go to you first.
Whoever it is, if you're looking for a co-founder or anybody else working with you along your entire journey, like for me, it's a hard thing to measure, but for me, like trust is absolutely everything. You can have similar different skills, similar different levels of background experience, market domain knowledge, whatever it is. You have to, especially as a co-founder team, you have to trust the other person literally with your life. That is what it often means to build a business or any series of businesses. So for me, I think there's no kind of hard and fast piece of advice. It's probably not that useful, because how do you build that? But whatever decision you take, make sure that whoever you're working with, you trust them. That would be my kind of, my 2 pence really.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jade. Ali.
I think I would say that when you partner with someone to start a business or you find a co-founder, is he or is she a person you want to spend most of your time with? Because you're going to spend majority of your time with that person. Saturday, Sunday, weekend, overnight, during the day. Like, he or she could have the best skills, but does he or she have the right personalities you want to spend time with? Because we've seen a lot of great founders, but they don't click. So if you don't find that, I think maybe that is not a right partnership, because you're better off maybe hiring that person down the road than just starting a business, because you can just not have a conversation. I think that's the key thing. You just have to click in terms of personalities.
Thanks. And Ian, lastly, you.
I think just think about from a perspective of particularly if you have a tech background, is tech is going to get you that seed money, but being a really good CEO is going to get you that exit. So it's sort of, when you're looking at starting up a business or choosing a co-founder, it's sort of keeping in mind that, this person could run this business, whether that's you or somebody else. They have a passion for running a business, not that's a 2-person startup. They have a passion for running a business that's 50 people, 100 people, and that they know that at some point somebody is going to have to step up and do that. You can't just be, technical founders and think that you're going to get an exit. Some people are lucky and they do, but it's very, very rare. So it's sort of thinking about the future, and am I surrounding myself with people who will fit those future roles and want to do those future roles?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, each of you. It's been really great just to delve into your journeys and kind of hear some of the stories that you've had along the way and hear your advice. And I guess in some ways, it's all very different for each of you. You've had different journeys. You've come from different perspectives, and yet through those challenges, and there have been many challenges along the way, there's some great upsides as well, and some excitement. I can see in each of you an excitement and an enthusiasm for what you've done and what you've achieved through it. So it's worth it. It's worth grinding away at some of the challenges in order to get to some of the really great outcomes that you've got. Thank you so much, each of you. It's been a pleasure to talk with each of you.
Thanks, Ben.
Great. Cheers, Ben.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I hope you've really enjoyed that panel discussion today. Hopefully you found loads of really useful advice and tips and insights along the way that you can apply for your own startup journey, whether that's launching on your own or whether that's launching with co-founders. I guess for me, one of the big lessons that comes through is, aside from the need for accountability, for trust, for clear communication, for some of the things, the pitfalls that you need to overcome, one of the things that I think comes through really clearly is that there's a range of different experiences, a range of different ways of approaching it. There's no single formula that ensures you success, but there will be challenges along the way, whichever way you go. And it's about how you deal with those challenges, how you overcome them, and work with whatever resources you have at your disposal to achieve success. So I hope you found it really helpful. I hope that as you pursue your own journey, you will benefit from some of the lessons that you've got from today. That's all from us today, other than to say thanks for joining us. Make sure you signed up to receive our newsletter. Keep in touch with Future World so you can see all of the events that are going to be coming your way very soon.